Usually, for example, if I was to facilitate a session, I spend a bit of time explaining the health benefits of laughter rather than just say, okay, let's just laugh.
Time to laugh.
Yes, yeah. Lovely to have you on, Ros. Appreciate it. We're off to Steve and I are off to laugh yoga, aren't we, Steve?
Well, put it this way, do yoga with me, I guarantee you'll be laughing.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I bet, yeah. All right, Ros, thank you. And Steve McCabe and Olivia Esterhazy, thank you very much for being with me. I've enjoyed every minute. Thank you very much.
Kia ora.
I'm back tomorrow, Wednesday, 3:45. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a $100,000 reward for the answer to this question. What happened to 2-year-old Amber-Lee Cruickshank? Almost 30 years on from the toddler's disappearance, her mother's plea is still raw.
Have a heart, grow some balls, come forward, put an end to this nightmare. I just want my baby girl back.
Nikki Crookshank needs answers. Tools down for a vote of no confidence in Ports of Auckland boss Tony Gibson. 6 banks promise not to close any more regional branches till the end of the year. But read the fine print. T's and C's apply. And the no vote in the cannabis referendum has tairāwhiti growers and their isolated communities in a rut.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Police don't think toddler Amber-Lee Cruickshank drowned in Lake Whakatipu, as many people believe. They today announced a $100,000 reward to uncover what happened to Amber-Lee, last seen in 1992 when she was 2 years old. She and her family had been staying at a property in Kingston where people were socialising at the time of her disappearance on October the 17th. Detective Inspector Stu Harvey told RNZ the reward is being offered because inquiries had stalled.
What we do know is that we don't believe that she went into Lake Whakatipu. We're pretty confident on that just with the inquiries and the witnesses that have been spoken to.
Stu Harvey says officers are keeping an open mind but believe someone out there holds the truth. A man has been charged with threatening to kill over comments made at a Hastings mosque. The police say earlier this month, on April the 2nd, a man visited the mosque and said threatening things to the people there. He left the mosque after police were called. Police took a 36-year-old Hastings man into custody at his home a short time later. They say they won't tolerate this sort of behaviour and encourage anyone with concerns to contact police immediately on 111, as the victims in this incident did. Hundreds of people have applied to patrol managed isolation facilities as government-employed security officers, replacing private contractors. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says nearly 400 people have applied for 156 vacancies. The government decided 8 months ago to hire its own security force, and the roles have been advertised in the past few weeks. ETU union organiser Matt Danaher says he is satisfied the guards are being offered competitive conditions.
It will certainly be significantly more than what they're on, and it'll be more than the living wage. It's protecting society from COVID and, ensuring that it doesn't get out into the wider community, which is different to a lot of roles out there.
The ministry is offering just over $56,000 on a 12-month contract. Disgruntled Ports of Auckland workers have unanimously cast a vote of no confidence in its management and board. Dozens attended a stop-work meeting today. The meeting comes after 3 deaths at the port and a subsequent review which uncovered serious health and safety failings. The Maritime Union's Craig Harrison says Ports of Auckland declined to front workers at the Okahu Bay Bowling Club today. The centre that played a key role in New Zealand's COVID-19 response has been awarded the Prime Minister's Science Prize for 2020. Te Pūnaha Matatini, the Centre of Research Excellence at the University of Auckland, offered modelling work and analysis in many areas relating to the pandemic. The centre's director, Professor Sean Hendy, says Te Pūnaha Matatini was a team of more than 24 people who sought to inform the public as well as officials.
We were very keen to make sure that as soon as possible, the work that we were doing for government got shared with the public, So the public at times were maybe only a week behind or even a few days behind getting the information that the Prime Minister saw.
Dr Christopher Cornwall of Victoria University won the $150,000 Emerging Scientist Award. Manuka Honey Group says it's happy to share knowledge and technology with Australian producers, just not the Manuka name. The New Zealand government is helping fund legal action to stop Australian beekeepers marketing their product as Manuka. But this week's Australia's Trade Minister has called for the two countries to work together and reach a Trans-Tasman agreement to market the product to the world. John Rawcliffe from the unique Manuka Factor Honey Association says Manuka is a taonga which should be protected.
We want the world honey industry to be in the same vein as cheeses or wines, where people can purchase a product, understand exactly where it's come from, share that story, understand its values, and we can add value on top of that. That's what we should be talking about.
John Rawcliffe says it would be good to settle the dispute outside of court. It's 5:04. The Crusaders are anxiously awaiting the results of scans on All Blacks Joe Moody and Jack Goodhue following the side's Golden Point win over the Hurricanes at the weekend. Moody suffered a foot injury while Goodhue injured his knee. The Crusaders play the Chiefs in Hamilton on Saturday, but neither Moody nor Goodhue is likely to feature, and forwards coach Jason Ryan knows they could well be without them for even longer.
Joe Moody and both Jack Goodhue are still waiting their MRI scans, so I've got no information around what that time frame looks like until they've had their scans. But, you know, it didn't look good, did it?
Meanwhile, the former Italy rugby captain and Scotland scrum coach Massimo Cutita has died from COVID-19 complications. He was 54. The former prop was a member of the Italy side who beat Scotland in their first Six Nations match in 2000 and captained the Azzurri at the 1995 World Cup. The Breakers will make their Australian Basketball League debut at their home away from home tonight. They are hosting the defending champions, the Perth Wildcats, at the Silverdome in Launceston in Tasmania. The Wildcats are second on the table while the Breakers are second to bottom. Brighton and Hove Albion have scored another valuable point in their quest to remain in England's football's Premier League, drawing 0-0 with Everton to move up one place to 15th. That's the news.
Hutt Valley High closes 10 classes because of black mould.
Kids in tears at school yesterday once, the news broke and it was confirmed they would be learning from home 50% of the time next term.
The Education Ministry says it's acted appropriately.
We've responded very proactively right now to the issues. 10 classrooms have now been isolated.
But the school's not happy.
This was a train wreck waiting to happen. It's been growing over the last 10 years regarding the state of our buildings.
The State of Our Nation Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells and isolated showers. Showers widespread and heavy for a time tomorrow with hail. 90 km/h wind gusts and possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine tonight. A few showers tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy, thundery with hail. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa. Showers mainly in the west, hail and possible thunderstorms at times, becoming fine tomorrow night. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, showers, possibly heavy and thundery in Nelson, clearing tomorrow morning. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. To Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, possible thunderstorms and hail, clearing Fiordland tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, rain today, thunderstorms possible in North Otago, showers tomorrow, clearing by the afternoon. Chatham Islands, low cloud and rain. RNZ National, it's 5:07.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen taku ingoa. Disgruntled Ports of Auckland workers have walked off the job today to cast a vote of no confidence in senior management and the board. The move puts pressure on Port Chief Executive Tony Gibson, who has to date ignored calls to walk away from the top job. Dozens of workers packed into the Maritime Union meeting at a bowling club in suburban Auckland. Board members, including Chairman Bill Osborne, were invited too, but they were all no-shows. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Munro were there.
Just behind me, dozens of port workers are gathered at the Okahu Bay Bowling Club for a stop work meeting. Now, this meeting follows the release of a scathing report on the back of 3 deaths connected to the port. It also follows growing calls for Chief Executive Tony Gibson to leave his post. The workers, many of whom are friends of Laboom Dyer and Pala Amokalati, who both died while working at the port, congregate behind closed doors for several hours. Inside, there is a unanimous vote of no confidence in the executive management and board of Ports of Auckland. Maritime Union Auckland Branch Secretary Russell Main says Ports of Auckland board members have been invited here today, but none have shown up.
It's now 3 weeks. I thought that perhaps we may have been contacted, and that was spoken about in there today. Henceforth, there's an underlying fear that there's just some time being played for at senior management level, and then this will all go away, and then in 6 months' time we can get back to normal. But I can assure you that's not going to happen.
Main says the Maritime Union wants a seat at the table in the form of representation on the port's health and safety committees.
By leaving it to the management and having a top-down health and safety driven culture, it doesn't work. It simply doesn't work, and it produces terrible results.
Checkpoint approached more than a dozen port workers following the stop work meeting, but they don't want to talk, fearing the repercussions if they do. Main is not surprised, saying most workers are simply too scared to speak up because they have too much to lose.
The ramifications for it are financial ramifications, because if you're removed as a lash leading hand or you're removed as a crane driver, you're talking the difference of probably $8 or $9 an hour, over a week, over a year. It's a lot of money.
Maritime Union National Secretary Craig Harrison says the next step is to go back to port leadership, requesting another meeting over the health and safety review.
From now, I think we'll write to the board and asking for a meeting with the board to express our concerns and look for a way forward. We're willing to engage. And at the stage, we've had little engagement from senior management on how to make some headway on major health and safety issues.
Harrison says issues at the port extend beyond Chief Executive Tony Gibson's lack of oversight, saying it's possible managers are covering up health and safety problems.
The senior executive management team, they've all been part of a team of managers that have got us to where we are. So you've got senior stevedoring managers and the CEO, and so we see it as a team effort. When Tony said in the media that he had little idea of what was going on, and you have to question that. But then are his senior managers reporting accurately what's actually happening in the workplace? So that raises further concern.
Checkpoint today approached Ports of Auckland for a response to the vote of no confidence in port management and the board. We also wanted to know if the port has met with union officials, reps and members after the health and safety review identified systemic safety failings and suspected underreporting of accidents. Port Communications Manager Matt Ball sent a simple response to Checkpoint's questions. No comment. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And if you were listening to that on radio, we'll put the 2 Nicks video up on our Facebook page. It is almost 12 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the program, 6 banks promise not to shut up any more regional shops, at least until the end of the year. But there is some fine print and we'll talk you through it. Have a heart, I just want my baby girl back. The words of distraught mother Nikki Crookshank almost 3 decades after her daughter Amber-Lee disappeared without a trace from a property on the shores of Lake Wakatipu. She's speaking out all these years on because the police have announced a $100,000 reward for information that leads to the conviction of anybody responsible for the 2-year-old's disappearance. Amber-Lee Rose Cruickshank went missing from a house on Cornwall Street in Kingston on the evening of October 17th, 1992. The police believe she may be the victim of foul play, but no one has ever been held accountable. In May this year, Amber-Lee would turn 31. Her mother, Nikki, just wants to know what happened to her baby girl and hopes the reward will flush out vital information.
I think it's absolutely awesome. It's long overdue. We've waited a long time for this to happen and just hope that we get some answers from it.
Yeah, what do you hope it'll achieve by offering that reward?
Well, I'm kind of hoping that whoever holds the key to this mystery, so to speak, this nightmare that we're living in, can come forward and actually put an end to it. You know, or if anyone has any information about it, that they come forward and that we can get some closure. You know, we've lived 29 years in pain and suffering and torment and, you know, endless searching and endless scenarios and stories, and we're just praying for this nightmare to end and that this $100,000 reward is going to be enough to prompt someone to come forward.
How have you dealt with all of that over those years?
With a lot of support from my family and friends. Without the support from my sons, I don't think I would have made it this far or got as far as I have without their support. They have been my absolute rocks through this. They have stuck by me through thick and thin. They have never given up hope, just like I have never given up hope. And without them, I don't think I would have got this far at all.
Nikki, I want to go back to the day, right? So it was on Cornwall Street in Kingston, and you were there because I understand you were waiting on some repairs to a house truck. Can you just give us a bit of a sense about what everyone was doing, how many people were there at the property leading up to the disappearance of your daughter?
Well, that day when we arrived in Kingston, the window in the back of the bus broke on the way there, and when we arrived there, we decided to stay the night to get it fixed. And my partner at the time had friends in Kingston who were interacting with other friends, and it was decided that we'd have a barbecue because we're staying for tea, get the jet ski out, the boat out. And that all went ahead, and we had a barbecue and then did the big clean-up. I recall probably around 8 to 10 of us. 29 years ago, I cannot remember everybody. I just remember 6 of us especially, and maybe a couple of others.
And Amber-Lee, had she been sort of motoring around before she disappeared? Do you remember the last time you laid eyes on her?
Yeah. They'd just gone and taken the boat out, and they'd come back in the ute, and my partner's friend went to lift her out, and she refused to go to him because she didn't know him. So my partner at the time, he lifted her out, and I got her a glass of Coke, and she was at the front of the house, and that was the last time I saw her.
I imagine that you have gone over every detail of that evening in your head, thousands of times?
Countless times. You know, wondering how, why, who, what. And forever wondering that, you know. I just can't understand how this has happened or why this has happened. You know, she was only 2.5 years old. She was just a little girl, you know, and she didn't like strangers. She didn't like water. You know, I knew my daughter. I knew what she was like. So for her to go off with a stranger, unlikely. For her to go near the lake, most unlikely of all. She hated water. She didn't even want to put her feet in that day to have a paddle. You know, so the only way she could be in that lake is if someone put her there.
When you noticed she'd gone missing, can you tell us a little bit about what happened? Some people will remember this, and others, this is new to them. So I imagine you searched extensively and looked in certain places, but give us a bit of a feel for what happened on that night and then the next couple of days.
When I noticed she was missing, kind of all hell broke loose. Running around asking everybody, have you seen Amber? Do you know where Amber is? No, I thought she was inside. No, I thought she was there with so-and-so. Then we all start going in different directions and looking. We started door knocking. Then the sun was going down. We knew we had to ring the police. You know, it was going to be dark. So we made the phone call. The police arrived. A search thing was put together. We were to stay at the house. I wasn't allowed to search for her. And they searched that night and Sunday, called it off Sunday night, searched Monday, and then called it off, presumed drowned. End of case.
So, Nikki, they searched the lake, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
And the rubbish tip?
Oh, I can't remember.
Right, but it was an extensive search.
It was a very extensive search. There was helicopters all up on the hills deploying the armies and dropping them in and then coming down the hills, the railway tracks, all the nooks and crannies, the creeks, the tracks, the lake, the shores, all the way down to Athol, Garston, all round there, inside drums that trees have been planted. You name it, they searched it.
Over all these years, Nikki, what have the police told to you about where the investigation is at and what theories are still open that they're working on?
They've always told me that the case remains open and that any leads that come in, that they follow up. But nothing has ever come to fruition. It's always come to a stalemate. I don't know where it is now or what their theory is. I mean, obviously at the beginning they presumed drowned. 6 months down the track, it then became foul play. The dump was searched then, but, you know, so much amount of rubbish had been dumped. Things come out of the woodwork when Crime Watch was featured on TV, and that's when it turned into a missing person case, presumably foul play.
And Nikki, do you believe foul play too?
Well, how else would she disappear? There's no other way she could have disappeared. That land in Kingston has been searched from head to toe. You know, there's new excavations going on there, and I'm sure as hell if she was buried somewhere there, she would have been found by now. So, yeah.
So, well, I suppose you said you've got hope, but hope is kind of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you're left waiting the whole time for something to happen, for news to come. So what would you say, Nikki, to the person out there who knows something?
Have a heart. Grow some balls. Come forward. Put an end to this nightmare. Imagine if it was your daughter and you were living this and someone had done this to you. How would you feel? You know, 29 years is enough for anyone to suffer this long and be tormented by not knowing. So just, please, let's bring it to closure. That's all we want. I just want my baby girl back.
And that was Nikki Cruickshank, the mother of Amber-Lee. Now, Nikki and the police need your help. If you have any information, you can contact the police on the 105 number and say it is about Operation Oliver. So again, get in touch on the 105 number with the police and reference the name Operation Oliver. The security guards patrolling managed isolation hotels are still almost entirely from private firms, even though the government decided 8 months ago to hire its own security force. It's only in the last few weeks that the roles have been advertised and there's been no shortage of applications. After a privacy breach in August, the number of Defence Force staff at the hotels was boosted. And the government said remaining security guards would in future be employed directly by the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Amy Williams reports.
The number of applicants keen to patrol managed isolation hotels as a ministry security officer is more than double the number of vacancies. Nearly 400 people have applied for 156 vacancies. The job advertisement shows the ministry's offering a salary starting above the living wage to just over $56,000 on a 12-month contract.
This is a great opportunity to contribute to the safety and well-being of New Zealand and its people. We're looking for passionate and observant security officers to provide a safe and secure environment for returnees and guests staying in managed isolation and quarantine hotel facilities.
But the Security Association's chief executive, Gary Morrison, is wary of the government employing its own security force.
I'd just question whether they necessarily have the expertise. They can obviously recruit well-skilled people, but any security provider will have very in-depth systems and processes. They'll have equipment that they utilise, etc., for the safety of the staff. And for a new operator starting up, that's not an easy process to replicate.
Mr Morrison says many security guards prefer their current jobs because the government has capped hours and a one-year contract.
Security providers I've talked to have been very open with their staff, and they've suggested that it's in their interest to go and explore the opportunities, but the strong feeling is that they will stick with their current roles and look for some degree of security based around what they've already had through their ongoing employment.
The ministry says it's been progressively moving to a security workforce that is mostly, around 85%, employed by government agencies to reduce the reliance on contractors. It says it was important to do this in a staged way to minimise any security risks at the 32 managed isolation facilities. The recruitment will be complete by the middle of the year. E2 Union represents security guards, and organiser Matt Danaher says it's important that those jumping the fence from a private firm into a public service managed isolation role are recognised for the additional responsibility. He says he's seen the contracts offered and is satisfied the conditions are reasonable.
It will certainly be significantly more than what they're on, and it'll be more than the living wage. It's protecting society from COVID and, ensuring that it doesn't get out into the wider community, which is different to a lot of roles out there.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins says the ministry's offering competitive workplace terms and conditions and employee benefits for these workers. Mr Danaher says the union would want the government-employed guards' short-term contracts to be extended.
They're going to be trained, they're going to be invested in, they're going to be making an investment themselves in this kind of work, so we would hope to see that they would be able to transition to becoming permanent, even if it was to do slightly different roles in the future.
The ministry says it will retain one private security company for backup support. Applications for the ministry's managed isolation security officer roles close on Monday. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
6 banks are promising not to close any regional branches until at least the end of the year, but that won't save dozens of bricks and mortar branches already earmarked for the chop. ANZ, ASB, BNZ, Kiwibank, TSB and Westpac announced today they'll honour an earlier commitment not to shut any regional offices until a pilot of 4 small-town banking hubs wraps up. The hubs provide basic banking services, including a smart ATM and support staff. The banks made the same promise in September 2019 but reneged on it after COVID hit and customers' behaviour changed. But following discussions with Finance Minister Grant Robertson, the promise has been resurrected. The Bankers Association represents the 6 banks involved. The boss, Roger Beaumont, explains their change of heart.
We've been doing this regional banking hub trial for a few months now, and this is an initiative that we worked on in conjunction with some discussions we were having with the Minister of Finance. And this is an attempt to actually look at how we can help small communities transition into a new banking environment where for a single bank to have a single branch in a small community, that's not sustainable. And so we felt it was appropriate to make a commitment in these regions that until the end of the trial now, we won't close any regional branches so that we can ensure that there's no distraction for the success of the trials and to show our commitment to regional New Zealand.
What do you mean, no distraction to the success of the trial?
Well, I guess we didn't want noise, if you like, about concerns around supporting the regions to distract from what is actually a really interesting pilot to try and find a new way of supporting and serving the in-branch banking needs of small communities.
What do you mean by noise?
Well, I guess it's just any sort of media distraction or controversy around any changes in the map of branches throughout the country.
So people have been upset about branches closing around the country. Is that what this is about? Countering the bad publicity?
Oh, look, we listen to the communities that we're a part of, and I can assure you that when a bank makes a decision to close a branch, particularly in a small community, that's not a decision they take lightly, but something that they do after very, very careful consideration. And they've got to listen to the way customers are choosing to engage with their bank. And as a result of COVID, that form of engagement changed dramatically with the number of customers who were engaging more online or electronically rather than in a physical bank environment.
So did the Finance Minister twist your arm a bit here? Because obviously the banks had suspended this commitment as of January this year. So you're kind of recommitting to a commitment that you suspended following conversations with the Minister of Finance. So did he twist your arms up your back?
Oh, look, not at all. We've had some very productive discussions with the Minister of Finance. In fact, the Minister of Finance has been...
What does that mean, productive conversations? Did he say, look, I need you to keep these open until the end of the year, at the very least?
No, not at all. We actually ended up suggesting that would be a way that we could progress things. But the Minister has been really committed to the banking hub trial. He, in fact, physically went and opened two of them, Twizel and Martinborough, and he is really committed and keen to see that these can be a good alternative or an attempt to find an alternative way to support small communities with their branch banking needs.
More committed than the banks? Because obviously the banks had suspended the commitment.
Well, we suspended the commitment because basically the launch of the Hubs trial was delayed a year as a result of COVID, and so the time frame of the commitment extended as a result of the delay in the Hubs opening, and so it just became impractical with the rapid changes in customer behaviour we were observing to retain that commitment until the end of the trial.
So who called the meeting with the Finance Minister?
Well, there wasn't a meeting with the Finance Minister. We've just had discussions with his office, and he's made his views around the importance of this trial succeeding really clear.
Well, let me put it another way, Roger. Would this commitment have come about if the Finance Minister hadn't become involved in, quote, constructive discussions?
Oh, I think it absolutely would have, because we're aware of the strong community feedback that we were hearing about branch closures.
Okay, so this commitment means that the banks are not going to close any other regional branches during the time of the trial, right, till the end of the year. So just if you can clarify a few things for me. BNZ announced in November 2020 that it was shutting 8 so-called metro branches. Are those still going to shut?
Yeah, so metro branches are excluded from this. So the commitment is to not close any regional branches outside of the 6 main centres.
Right, so they're going to shut. They were also going to shut Huntly. Is that still closing?
Look, if that's already been announced, it will be, yes.
Wairoa, Balclutha, Kaikoui, Geraldine, Cromwell, Taumaranui, are those still all going to close?
So any that have already been announced will still be closing. This is any further announcements to what's already been announced.
Okay, so Kiwi Bank last month, 7 branch closures it announced it was intending, including Gisborne. That will still go ahead as well?
As far as I'm aware.
Okay, so with all of those closures already on the books, really what is this achieving, this commitment?
Well, it's achieving no further closures until the end of the year being announced to ensure that we're demonstrating that we're as committed as we can be to the success of this trial.
How many other regional branches are there left to close?
Oh, look, I don't have the number of regional branches on me, I'm afraid, Lisa.
Okay, and so aside from the ones I've listed, what other ones are slated for closure that will still go ahead, despite the commitment?
Well, it's any that have been announced. Once again, I don't have that list in front of me.
So you don't know how many?
Oh, look, it's a few dozen that have been announced that are closing.
It's
that were
more than a
announced
few
earlier in the year.
dozen. More than a few dozen, because it's 40 branches that the BNZ announced alone.
Yep, that's a fair point.
Okay. So, how well do you think the banks are serving regional customers then?
Well, look, it's not just branch banking that serves customers. As I said, during COVID, we saw an incredible acceleration in the number of customers that are engaging with banks electronically or online. And in parallel to that, we also saw a massive decline in the number of customers who were walking through the door of a branch. So
That's because they were in lockdown, wasn't it, though, Roger?
Well, no, banks stayed open during lockdown on some limited hours. So, but
people were avoiding contact with people at the direction of the government.
But that trend, since we've gone out of lockdown, has continued in terms of declining numbers of people walking through the doors of branches. And so what you're seeing is a double effect, if you like, of not only more people banking online, but less people physically going into a branch. Some of these regional branches, they're having less than 10 customers a day through the door, which just makes that traditional branch banking model unsustainable.
And that was Roger Beaumont from the Bankers Association. Now, Minister Robertson's office has confirmed to Checkpoint that he did raise concerns with the bank's representatives early last month because he was worried about the number of bank branch closures. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the motel generation, children who've been living in emergency motel accommodation most of their lives. So what do police think happened to missing toddler Amber-Lee Cruickshank? They join us after 6. And more on the Maori Party's undeclared donations. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We would love to hear from you if you're in a region where you're experiencing bank branch closures. What kind of impact is that having on you? And standing by with the headlines is Susanna.
The mother of toddler Amber-Lee Cruickshank, who disappeared 29 years ago, has appealed to anyone who has information about her to have a heart. The police today announced a $100,000 reward to uncover what happened to Amber-Lee, last seen in Kingston when she was 2 years old. Her mother, Nikki Crookshank, told Checkpoint she hopes the reward will prompt someone to end their family's nightmare. A man has been charged with threatening to kill over comments made at a Hastings mosque. The police say earlier this month, on April the 2nd, a man visited the mosque and said threatening things to the people there. They say they won't tolerate this sort of behaviour and encourage anyone with concerns to contact police immediately on 111, as the victims in this incident did. The security guards patrolling managed isolation hotels are still almost entirely from private firms, even though the government decided 8 months ago to hire its own security force. After a privacy breach in August, the number of Defence Force staff at the hotels was boosted, and the government said it would employ guards in future. The roles have been advertised in the past few weeks. The Maritime Union says it has had no formal response from Ports of Auckland, despite repeated requests to meet over safety. Dozens of employees today attended a stop work meeting during which they voted unanimously that they no longer have confidence in management and the board. Cutting-edge research showing the pH levels inside corals and seaweeds and the related impacts of climate change has won a Wellington Man the Prime Minister's Emerging Scientist Award. Christopher Cornwall, a Rutherford Discovery Fellow at Victoria University, received the award for his research on how marine organisms will fare under climate change. Dr. Cornwall says he plans to use the $150,000 prize to further his research. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And if you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And Nona Peltier is in the studio with me for business news. Nona, I can't keep up with how confident or not businesses are feeling, but you've got the latest quarterly survey from the Institute of Economic Research, and it's telling us what?
Well, it's still a pessimistic reading, but it's improving. So a net 11% of firms can expect conditions to worsen over the near term, and that compares with 16% before. So I know those numbers sound funny, but basically it's an improvement. If only a net 11% things are going to get worse, that's better than a net 16%, correct?
Yeah, so what's the reasoning behind this?
It's the usual story. You've heard this before. It's rising prices and the ability to pass those costs on, as well as supply disruptions. And so that's affecting primarily the retail sector, which is struggling with supply chain and also rising prices because of the freight costs and so forth, and also the construction industry, which is really struggling to find the materials they need, plus the labor.
Like wood.
Like wood, but also, people with a hammer, right? So, yeah, it's really difficult for both those sectors, and that's dragging the overall sentiment down. However, it's still better than what you might expect, and that means that there's an outlook there that suggests that the start of the year was better than expected, which means we might not be in a recession for the first quarter ended March 31st. So we'll see what happens there.
Okay, let's move on to SkyCity, right, the casino operator. Now, it's severed ties with what you call junket operators effective immediately. What are they?
Yeah, we wondered the same thing. So we tried to get the information from SkyCity that they were absolutely not forthcoming. But there was an investigation in Australia regarding this term junkets. And what these junkets are basically organized gambling trips from international visitors. And the investigation in Sydney suggested that they were associated with potentially associated with organized crime and money laundering activities. So basically, you're a high roller, you get on board with these, tours, I suppose. But the real, they get paid a commission, the people who organize these tours, and they look after any kind of debts.
To bring the gamblers in?
Yes, they bring the gamblers. But it apparently is associated with some pretty...
that's the allegation.
Yeah. That's what the Sydney investigation found, it associated with the Crown there. So that was raised as an issue when the SkyCity announced their first half result. That was last month, or the month before, rather. And so that was a bit of an issue for SkyCity. Now, SkyCity's international business, which is their high roller business, has taken an enormous hit, as you would expect, because we don't have those visitors coming in. So perhaps this is a good time for the organization to address the issue. But anyways, it's effective immediately, and they're going to look for alternative ways of bringing international
And given they weren't particularly forthcoming, I'm suspecting you won't have the answer to this, but do we know how many tours they were getting through these junket operators? Or if one assumes they were getting them if they're cancelling all ties.
I'm not surprised you asked. It's about 15% of the overall. And so so we don't have a really good number for 2020, but just comparatively, in the 6 months ended December 2019, the international business brought in $57,680,000.
So not small fry.
No, right. Not at all.
Okay, now speaking of big numbers, what have you got for us from the market?
We do have some big numbers, as a matter of fact, yeah. Our NZX Top 50 Index, it ended up 138 points. That's 1.1% up, which is a pretty good number, to 12,656. And the New Zealand dollar, it's steady again at 70 US cents, 92.2 Australian, and 51 British pence. And we can expect to see some really interesting numbers coming out of the U.S. market with the corporate reporting season getting underway this week. We'll see what happens with that. Meanwhile, I think that the Asian markets are a little bit mixed on where things are going.
I'm sure you'll keep us up to date.
I will.
Nona Peltier with our business news there. There are fears Aotearoa could end up with a motel generation as whānau struggling to afford rents are bumped across emergency accommodation providers. Latest figures show there are more than 4,000 children living in emergency accommodation, mainly motels, with more than 1,000 of those living there for up to a year. Social service providers say we're teetering on the brink of a generation of kids raised in motels, and the effects will be felt for generations to come. Nita Blake-Person reports.
Tell him, Nanny, toot toot.
It's dinner time at this Whangarei motel, and this young baby is cuddled up with mum for a play.
I don't know how to describe her. She's just the happiest baby.
Her mum doesn't want to be identified, so we'll call her Hannah. Hannah is 20, her baby is 8 months old, and they've been living in this motel for 3 months. It's the third motel they've lived in while desperately searching for a rental.
It's like we go to viewings every day, and because we don't have a car, we have to bus everywhere. Yeah, and we go to about 3 viewings a day, I think. And don't get any luck with them.
The rents are almost all out of Hannah's price range, with her whole income only just covering most rents. She's still looking every day, but it's taking its toll.
Just because they don't give us a chance, I just think every time I keep trying, I just get told no, or they tell me that I don't fit their boxes for the house, and I just get all sad. I can't remember.
Inside, Hannah's motel unit is immaculate, with baby's play space carefully curated in the small lounge. Tonight, her grandparents are here, but that's a luxury they're not always allowed.
The situation is you're not meant to have any visitors, but we come and drop her off. We eat with her and spend a little bit of time. But otherwise, she has to walk to the library, and we'll meet her at the library so we can catch up. But they're a bit more nicer now, the old couple here, so we're grateful for that.
They've had warnings about staying too long, but say all they want is to see the baby and support her mum.
And just because of reasons with my own landlord, I can't have any more people stay in my house, so that's kind of where it's at for us. And yes, they were with us for a while, but it wasn't, in my tenancy agreement that I could have. And it's family, it's your moko. And so to not be able to have them with us is very sad.
This whānau is one of thousands living in motels, as a lack of affordable housing forces them from their homes. Latest figures from the Ministry for Social Development show there are 4,137 children living in motels. Single parents with children make up the second highest emergency housing applicants. Auckland has the highest figures, followed by Hastings and Rotorua. On the east coast, Joan Alanata says the problem is all too real.
My concern is with this motel generation of children is that they won't actually have the stability or know what it's like to have a solid or a foundation somewhere where they can call home.
Miss Nata of Ngāti Porou and Tūhoi is the Bernardo's service manager for Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. She says the recent case of a 4-year-old boy brought home to her the struggles that children growing up in motels could come up against later in life.
And if I count off the top of my head of the places that I know he's lived in his short 4 years, I would say he's had 7 places that we know of. Compared to myself, when I was 16, I'd only lived in 2 houses.
Those concerns are echoed by Glenys Philip-Barbara, the Assistant Maori Commissioner for Children. Ms Philip-Barbara of Ngāti Uipohatu and Ngāti Porou says Aotearoa is teetering on the brink of a generation raised in motels, and New Zealanders cannot accept that as being okay.
Once the government decides that this is an urgent issue, then I have absolute faith that the communities who are already at the forefront of designing solutions to these problems will step in and can work on the solutions.
She says Māori are overrepresented in the housing waitlist, and the situation will be with us for decades ahead. And with New Zealand's travel bubble about to open, she fears things could be about to get worse.
The announcement that the travel bubble between New Zealand and Australia is opening up this month raises the spectre of urgency around solving this problem for New Zealand's children. I mean, I'm sure any decent New Zealander would be horrified if they knew that our children, were being moved out of motels to make space for tourists.
In a statement, the Social Development Minister Carmel Sepuloni says while a motel room is a better solution for children than sleeping in cars, the government recognises it is not suitable and considers this to be an urgent issue. She says a funding package for whānau with children in emergency housing has been set up to cover additional costs, especially related to keeping kids in education, early childhood and for wellbeing needs, while major work is underway to increase New Zealand's housing supply. Back at the motel in Whangarei, that work can't come soon enough.
Well, I guess we just have to take what they say at face value, and they say they're working really hard to do things, but progress is slow, and for the people down here and in the camps, I guess, time is just going slower than ever when you're stuck.
In Whangarei for Checkpoint, Cornita Blake-Person aho.
It is 13 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, the police on the $100,000 incentive for someone to speak up about the disappearance of a toddler almost 30 years on. The close no vote in last year's cannabis referendum has left Tairāwhiti cannabis growers and its isolated communities in a rut. They say prohibition leads to more abuse of harder drugs and destroys opportunities for remote towns. Our reporter Tom Kitchen has more.
The sun shines bright over the top of Hikurangi Maunga, the first place in the world to see the sunrise. Below the might of Hikurangi and its neighbouring Aorangi Maunga is Te Ahi o Te Atua, or the Fire of the Gods, where natural gas flows through the land. It's surrounded by pockets of legal cannabis plants. Many are run by former illicit growers, who say they're trying to change the industry and people's lives for the better. Pororangi Tawhiwhirangi of the East Coast Cannabis Company is one of these people. His father worked as a staffer in the beehive, and his childhood was spent walking through the halls of power. But as a teenager, he was banished from his family and had to return to Ruatoria.
Being banished from your family, you don't really go out asking for help, so you've got to really try and provide for yourself. I met my partner and we started having kids, and I had to do something to help put food on the table, clothes on their backs.
He says growing cannabis was the only thing he knew how to do to help his partner and children survive.
First job I ever done here on the coast was working for a work trust that only paid $20 a day, and you get to keep your benefits. So when you're sort of stuck in a rut like that, having a little side hustle of growing and selling cannabis can sort of just help things become a bit more easier financially.
But as his children grew up, the tides turned. He didn't want them to follow in his footsteps, so he made a change.
It was a chance for me to either give up everything I knew and just, keep working, follow my life like that, or try and utilise these skills, 2.5 decades of skills and intellectual property to try and help.
This is a change to help the community, all about manaakitanga. One of those people who's there is Ako, who spends a lot of his time driving the buggy around the patch.
It has its ups and downs. One day it's too cruisy, and then some days you're working your arse off.
Ako was a cray fisherman, but now he's moved from the moana to the whenua. Alongside the cannabis, there are also veggie plants for community use. On the ground in the cannabis patch, Ako says you can't deny the realities. Weed does exist.
That is what it is, bro. No use denying it's not part of our world. It is. I'm sure some of these fellas in their beehive are on it.
In Ruatoria, over 90% of the population identify as Maori. It's home to about 800 people. Here, people tell me that taking a hard line on cannabis is making it more difficult for the community, as in some cases it leads to more abuse of harder and more dangerous drugs like meth. Pororangi Tawhiwhirangi says people are looking for a fix, and if they can't get cannabis, meth's often the next option.
We always hear these arguments that cannabis is a gateway drug, but it's actually an exit drug. For instance, we see a lot of people who, they say they go from cannabis to meth, but the reality of that is that through drug testing in New Zealand, it's pushed a lot of people off cannabis onto meth because meth isn't easily as detectable as cannabis is in a drug test.
He wishes cannabis was legal. While taxes may be hard to swallow for those who've been at it illegally for years and they're getting all the profit, he says tax puts money into communities.
We can use that money to help our people, whether it be helping towns like Ruatoria and places up Northland and that have been impacted by cannabis prohibition for decades.
Rua Bioscience is a pharmaceutical cannabis company based in Ruatoria and Gisborne. Its co-founder, Manuka, says cannabis could be a way to develop the area.
My co-founder and I had a goal, of job creation, economic development for Ruatoria. Most of the whānau have moved away from the land over the last 50 years, small population, high unemployment, and we wanted to try and turn that around, some high-value industry rather than just logs and farming.
He says a yes vote would have resulted in more opportunities for Ruatoria locals.
Would have been more of the craft cannabis that we see in places like Canada and California. That would have created more opportunity for our whānau to participate. The barriers would have been lower to enter the market and the legal market. So that's a big disappointment from our perspective.
At a nationwide level, the National Hauora Coalition co-signed a letter sent yesterday to the government demanding changes in drug laws. Its clinical director, Dr. Rawiri McCree-Jansen, says a cannabis conviction can easily ruin lives, and that's not fair.
You don't have a conviction for cannabis as a young person, but if you did, it would have affected your education, it would have affected your qualifications, your income, it would affect your ability to get housing. So it would have enormous impacts on your life trajectory.
He says an overhaul would be doing right by Māori who bear the brunt of drug use criminalisation.
The justice system we currently have delivers all of those inequitable impacts on Māori. And I think we should change the way that we're doing it and get much better results for Māori, but for the whole of New Zealand.
As for the remote, isolated communities in places like Tairāwhiti, they're hoping the government takes them along on the conversation. E Ruatoria, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Tom Kitchener-Ho.
Government ministers are confident no taxpayer money has been caught up in donations to the Maori Party that have been referred to the police. A donation of $50,000 from the National Urban Māori Authority, which delivers whānau ora services, is one of 3 that have potentially breached Electoral Commission laws. The police will investigate whether the laws around declaring donations over a certain size have been breached, but there's no concern from inside the beehive that taxpayer funds are involved. Here's our political reporter, Miriana Johnson.
The National Urban Māori Authority advocates for Māori social service and health providers, which have whānau ora contracts. However, the Ministry of Māori Development says it provides no whānau ora money directly to the authority. It says there is no evidence funding is being used inappropriately. The donation from the authority is one of 3 that was over the $30,000 threshold, which electoral laws state must be declared within 10 days. The Prime Minister says it's a matter for police.
Those are where those questions are best examined. I can say on a principle basis, of course, it is our absolute expectation that no government money would be spent in electoral donation.
The Minister for Whānau Ora, Peeni Henare, is confident no taxpayer money has been used to fund the Maori Party.
All of the reports that I've received on the money that's been spent and the outcomes we've achieved have been on the money. And if there's any concerns by the police in their investigation, it will come through.
The Minister of Māori Development, Willie Jackson, who chaired the authority himself until 2017, reiterates it does not get whānau ora money.
They're not a recipient of the whānau. As I said, they distribute those contracts amongst the different agencies, and so I'd be surprised if there was any whānau ora money mixed up with them at all.
The authority's chairperson, Lady Tureti Moxon, wouldn't comment, citing the police investigation. One of the other 2 donations being investigated is from the Maori Party Tāne Vice President, John Tamahere, who made a donation totalling $158,000. There's also a $120,000 donation from the company Aotearoa Te Kahu. Its sole shareholder is a trustee service owned by Wellington law firm Morrison Kent Lawyers. Maori Party President Jay Wilson was asked on RNZ who the donors were.
That was given to John Tamihere, and so you'd need to talk to Aotearoa Te Kahu and John about that.
RNZ has asked Mr Tamahere if he knows who the donors are from Aotearoa Te Kahu. He is not making any comment until after the police inquiry is completed. Meanwhile, the Electoral Commission has asked for a please explain from the National Party about the late filing of a donation totalling $35,000. Between May and November last year, Garth Barfoot made 4 donations to the party, but it was only declared to the Commission at the end of last month. Under the rules, once donations from one source total more than $30,000, it must be declared within those 10 days. A spokesperson for the Commission says they look at each case and all the circumstances involved before making a decision about whether it should be referred to police. That includes the amount over the threshold, when it came to light, and whether the parties filed late returns in the past. Nationals President Peter Goodfellow told reporters he had no comment to make about the donation and referred questions to the Commission. I parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
Parliament is in line for a multi-million-dollar upgrade with 3 new buildings planned for the precinct. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, says the current setup is subpar, uneconomic and unsustainable, with MPs and staff scattered across the city in a haphazard manner. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It's Extreme Makeover Parliament Edition, and MPs are getting in their wish lists.
Billiard tables. A decent coffee would be good.
I'm quite keen on a Coke Zero fountain tap.
I don't know, I'd probably see an extension of the pool.
No luck on those counts, but change is coming. The grand plans unveiled today. The Speaker, Trevor Mallard, gathered media to display his vision. 3 new buildings on the precinct.
What you're seeing before you now is something which is designed to have the buildings of the Parliament owned by the people of New Zealand, designed to be good economic value over probably the 100-year life.
At the heart of the plan is a 6-storey wooden office block out the back of Parliament, which could double for the Beehive in case of emergencies. Another 3-storey building will house up to 9 ministers, and another small block will go up for secure deliveries.
It'll be good for everyone who uses it, old people, young people, animals.
It's hoped the project will solve Parliament's overcrowding problem and haphazard set-up, a sprawling morass with offices spread across multiple buildings. Never mind the cost to rent the Bowen House Tower on Lambton Quay, more than $100 million every 15 years. Taxpayer money to a foreign landlord. The new buildings haven't been costed yet, but Mr Mallard puts it upwards of $200 million.
I want these 3 buildings to cost less than 2 cycles of that lease. Buildings for 100 years that will cost less than 30 years of lease money.
The plan has been some time coming. The former Speaker, David Carter, was working on a similar proposal before it was stymied by New Zealand First after the 2017 election. For the most part, this time there seems to be political consensus, with the ACT Party the only one sounding somewhat reluctant.
If they're going to be done, then I'm not going to stand in the way. We agreed not to politicise it and argue, but if you ask me, do I think the buildings are fine as they are? I think they are.
We, of course, need to make sure that the people who work in Parliament are safe, that they're not in an earthquake-prone building, and that's really triggered what we're having to do here.
We will actually make that money back over the life of the building.
A budget bid will be lodged next year, with work expected to begin shortly after. The plan is to have all the buildings finished and ready to go for the 2026 election. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
To your feedback now on the subject of banks in the regions closing up shop. This one says, excellent to see the banks finally reacting to the pressure from 33 mayors insisting on a review of bank branch closures to the Prime Minister. However, a socially responsible approach to provincial services will be required in the near future, and that's from Mayor Alex Bayan from South Wairarapa. Stacey says, I went to pop into the ANZ Matamata yesterday to find it closed. It's now on reduced hours. How can they expect to get customers through the doors if the doors aren't even open, says Stacey. Someone else says, what happened to the banking caravan that used to go from town to town once a week?
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei a tāua tēnei. The police will have their search and surveillance powers extended to enable them to take action if they suspect a terrorist act is being planned under new counter-terrorism legislation. The new laws have been drafted as part of the ongoing response to the Christchurch mosque attacks. It creates a new definition for terrorist act and 3 new offences designed to target those planning or preparing for an attack. In that situation, the police could deploy their warrantless powers of entry, search and surveillance to prevent an attack being carried out. The Justice Minister, Chris Whāwhoi, says there are safeguards in place.
But I think, importantly, if they believe a situation is in preparation and close to becoming an attempt or an act, then they need the ability to act.
Chris Whāwhoi says new hate speech laws are still being developed. Principals warn some schools are struggling to maintain ageing buildings. Hutt Valley High this week ordered hundreds of senior students to study from home because of black mould in a 50-year-old classroom block. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The school says it's grateful the Education Ministry has stepped in to help, but officials have known about leaks in the building for years and should have acted much sooner. Principals told RNZ schools get funding for maintenance, but some problems are bigger than they can handle, especially if buildings were poorly constructed in the first place. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says some schools are better than others at maintaining their buildings, and some are now paying for problems that have gone unaddressed for decades. Ko John Gerritsen, TNA.
The mother of a 12-year-old girl who was told to leave a mixed rugby field in Rotorua says one size doesn't fit all with gender rules. On Sunday, Mackenzie Anderson Tito left the tournament in tears after an organiser said girls over 12 can't play in mixed teams. Cherie Anderson says New Zealand Rugby League shouldn't have exclusive policies.
I think the policy is absolute rubbish. It really needs to be reviewed, with the decision being left to parents or the club as to whether the girl should play or not, because one size rule doesn't fit all. They should just let our daughter play.
Cherie Anderson says she wants better advocacy for girls in contact sports. The security guards patrolling managed isolation hotels are still almost entirely from private firms, even though the government decided 8 months ago to hire its own security force. After a privacy breach in August, the number of Defence Force staff at hotels was boosted, and the government said it would employ guards in future. Amy Williams reports.
It's only in the last few weeks that nearly 400 people have applied for 156 government security officer roles. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says recruitment will be complete in 2 months. 31 of 32 operations and security managers, who are responsible for day-to-day management of the new security workforce, have been recruited. It says it's important to stage the replacement of private contractors to minimise security risks. Ko Amy Williams, tēnei.
The Minister for Whānau Ora is confident no taxpayer money was caught up in donations to the Maori Party that have been referred to the police. A donation of $50,000 from National Urban Māori Authority is one of 3 that have potentially breached Electoral Commission rules. The National Urban Māori Authority provides advocacy for 4 Māori social service and health providers. Those providers receive Whānau Ora funding. The Minister for Whānau Ora, Peeni Henare, says he's confident no taxpayer money has been used to fund the party. Heart patients at Waikato Hospital are being assured the service is up to scratch after an external review highlighted problems with it. A heavily redacted version of the 2018 report, which has been made public, said the system was broken, but there were strong, honest and capable individuals prepared to resurrect it. The review by Australian experts was inherited by the team of commissioners who replaced the District Health Board in 2019. Then Deputy Commissioner Andrew Connolly is confident in the changes that have been made as a result.
8 surgeons there now, plus their staff. The outcomes are excellent. They're well below what you would expect for predicted issues of complications and mortality.
Andrew Connolly says they haven't identified any cases where patients were harmed under the old system. The centre that played a key role in New Zealand's COVID-19 response has been awarded the Prime Minister's $500,000 Science Prize for 2020. Te Pūnaha Matatini, the Centre of Research Excellence at the University of Auckland, offered modelling work and analysis in many areas relating to the pandemic. The centre's director, Professor Sean Hendy, says a team of more than 24 people sought to inform the public as well as officials. It's 6:05. The Hurricanes captain and All Blacks loose forward Ardie Savea will be sidelined for up to 2 months after suffering a knee ligament injury in the weekend's Golden Point loss to the Crusaders at the weekend. Savea tore a ligament in his left knee just after half-time and will now miss the rest of Super Rugby Aotearoa and the start of the joint Trans-Tasman competition. The Crusaders also have injury problems, with fellow All Blacks Joe Moody and Jack Goodhue awaiting scan results on foot and knee injuries respectively. All Black captain Sam Cane is also out of action after surgery on a pectoral tear he suffered playing against the Blues last week. The Breakers will make their Australian Basketball League debut at their home away from home tonight. They're hosting the defending champions, the Perth Wildcats, at the Silverdome in Launceston in Tasmania. Tonight's game is the first NBL fixture in the state in 15 years. Australian club Central Coast Mariners is dismissing speculation that they've been in lengthy discussions with Manchester United about a potential takeover by the English Premier League side. The Sydney Morning Herald has reported the Gosford club has been in talks with United about buying the licence of the Mariners and turning it into a sister club. United's Premier League rivals Manchester City own rival A-League side Melbourne City. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples new versions of old songs by Pixie Williams and the re-release of an Auckland classic from Voom. We have a window on the word of Denmark's mink industry post-COVID. There's a smart talking discussion between poet Bill Manhire and all-round enthusiast John Campbell and ABC rural reporter Lucy Thackeray on a mice plague of biblical proportions that's sweeping New South Wales. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taumaranui, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Fine spells and isolated showers. Showers widespread and heavy for a time tomorrow with hail, 90 kilometres an hour, wind gusts and possible thunderstorms. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine tonight. A few showers tomorrow afternoon, possibly heavy and thundery with hail. Taranaki to Wellington, including Taihape and Wairarapa. Showers mainly in the west. Hail and possible thunderstorms at times. Becoming fine tomorrow evening. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, showers possibly heavy and thundery in Nelson, clearing tomorrow morning. Isolated showers tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, possible thunderstorms and hail, clearing Fiordland tonight and elsewhere tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, rain tonight, thunderstorms possible in North Otago, showers tomorrow, clearing by the afternoon. And Chatham Islands, low cloud and rain, clearing tomorrow morning. RNZ National. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō, ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa, and this is Checkpoint. Parliament is in line. No, I think we've already had that story, haven't we? So let's move on. A $100,000 reward and possible immunity from prosecution are being offered in a bid to flush out clues in the nearly 30-year-old cold case of missing toddler Amber-Lee Cruickshank. The 2-year-old disappeared from a house in Cornwall Street in Kingston on the shores of Lake Wakatipu on October 17th, 1992. Her mum, Nikki, and her partner at the time were staying with friends. They were enjoying a barbecue when they noticed that Amber-Lee was gone. Despite extensive searches and interviews with everyone in the town, the toddler has never been found and the police believe she is the victim of foul play. Earlier in the program, Amber-Lee's mother, Nikki, pleaded with anyone in the know to have a heart, put an end to her nightmare and come forward. Detective Inspector Stu Harvey is also hoping the promise of a reward will coax someone out.
Well, we believe that there's people out there that have got information that would assist us in our investigation. The whole purpose of this case really is to get some answers and some closure for Amber-Lee's family. Her mother's been living this nightmare for the last 28 and a half years. And look, anything that we can get from the public in regards to, getting some evidence or information which will lead to the answers on how Amber-Lee disappeared would be, is going to be great for them.
So the police say they believe that she may have been the victim of foul play. Why do you say that?
Well, the investigation's been ongoing for 28 and a half years. The inquiries that have been undertaken really just, when you review all those, you just look at it and you say that our most likely scenario is that there's been some foul play. And what I mean by that is that somebody's been involved in her disappearance.
The thing is, she was a little girl, 2 years old. The house is right next to a lake. I'm just trying to get a sense of why you are so convinced there's foul play rather than her just wandering off and drowning or something else like that.
Oh, look, the investigation team's very confident that that hasn't happened. The inquiries to date really have ruled out that possibility. At the time, there was extensive searches of the lake and the lake area. There's also some expert opinions given after those searches in regards to whether or not she could have ended up in the lake. And further, there's witnesses that would eliminate that as a possibility as well around the time that she disappeared. So you put all that together and we're pretty confident that she hasn't ended up in the lake.
So what is the working theory here?
Well, we're keeping a really open mind in regards to what's actually happened to Amber-Lee. And at this stage, we believe that somebody's been involved in her disappearance. And we really just, the $100,000 reward will hopefully spark somebody into letting us, or giving us some information or providing us with some evidence which is going to give some closure to the family.
Do the police get a sense that at the time when they spoke to all these people in the area that, well, they weren't as forthcoming as they could have been? Some of them?
Well, everybody in that township at the time was spoken to. There was extensive searches of all the properties. From those inquiries, there's been ongoing inquiries in relation to some people that were in the area at the time. I don't really want to go into the details of who or how many that, there were further inquiries done with. But certainly that has been one of our focuses, that there's somebody in that township that may know more. And that's where hopefully this reward will give us the opportunity to follow through on some of that.
So those people of interest, do they remain of interest, and are they cooperating with you now?
Well, we've spoken with many of those people on numerous occasions. Some have been eliminated. Others we're still, reviewing on a regular basis whether or not they are persons of interest or not. What we really need from the public is some assistance in regards to information which might be able to point us in the right direction or give us an opportunity to progress the investigation.
So, Detective, all cards on the table here. Are you basically saying that you've come to a dead end and you need a hand?
Well, what I'm saying is that we just need some assistance to try and progress it. We've done, there's been a lot of media about this in the past. There's been a huge amount of investigation work put into it. It's really the time now where we're hoping that something new and fresh, like a reward of this amount, will give us the opportunity to for someone to provide some, material information or evidence which is going to lead to the identity of the person involved in her disappearance.
Do you think it's a single person?
We're keeping a really open mind about who might be responsible. As we've mentioned, there's also the opportunity for immunity from prosecution for anybody that may have been involved but not, being the main offender. So, as I say, we're just keeping a really open mind about what's actually happened.
That's significant, really, Detective. Can I just pause for a second on that?
Yeah.
So you will give immunity to someone who hands you a principal offender. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'll say is that there'll certainly be consideration given to that person obtaining immunity. It's a difficult process to go through, but what I can say, it will be definitely considered if someone was to come forward.
So, in terms of that, I realise it's a difficult scenario to work through, but what level of involvement would this person need to have had in order to obtain immunity?
Well, anybody that's not being the main offender in relation to her disappearance.
So when you say main offender, what are you inferring here? Are you saying that the person who has potentially ended Amber-Lee's life, you were looking for that person, and anyone who played a lesser role could be eligible for immunity?
Yeah, well, that in simple terms, that would be how I'd categorise it. As I say, consideration would certainly be given, but that's, in simple terms, that would be correct.
So, you are working on the fact that you believe Amber-Lee is dead?
Well, the investigation is a missing person. The investigation has been right from the start and still being treated like that. But, we've got to keep in mind all possibilities. So we're trying to keep a really open mind about what could have possibly happened. It would be just really good for us, and also really good for Amber-Lee's family to be able to fill in some of those gaps and find out who's actually been responsible for her disappearance.
Have you any evidence that suggests she could still be alive?
There's no evidence at this stage in regards to that.
What do you think about the prospect that she may have been taken out of the area?
Well, as I say, we're keeping a really open mind about what's actually happened to her. We can't rule that in or out at this stage.
I know at the time a child's clothes were found in toilets in Queenstown some days after her disappearance. Are you able to tell us whether that was connected?
Well, that's unknown at this stage. At this time, we've never been able to confirm or rule out that clothing being connected to Amber-Lee.
So it's a very real possibility she could have been transported away from the district.
We're not really be able to rule anything in or out at this stage, but hopefully if we get some more information, we'll be able to fill some of those gaps in for the family.
And that was Detective Inspector Stu Harvey. Now, if you have any information that you think could help with this investigation, contact the police on 105, and you need to say it's in relation to Operation Oliver. So call in on the police 105 number, and the inquiry that you're giving information for is Operation Oliver. The Education Minister has defended his ministry's handling of serious problems that forced Hutt Valley High School to close an entire block of classrooms. Hundreds of senior students will have to spend half their week learning at home because there's black mould in 13 classrooms. Principals say plenty of other schools are also struggling with defective buildings they can't afford to fix. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The ministry has stepped in to help the school with the 50-year-old classroom block, and it's not yet clear if that will result in repairs or a total rebuild. The school says it's pleased with the ministry's help, but the former chair of the school's Board of Trustees, Peter Stevens, says the ministry should have acted a lot sooner.
This block, certainly since 2014, was earmarked and should have been demolished and replaced. That was the appropriate thing to do. And so talking about trying to put, sterilise mould is just not appropriate.
But the Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the ministry has not let the school down.
I don't necessarily think that they've been slow to act. Like I said, there's a variety of different issues that are at play here, including the fact that schools are given money every year to maintain their buildings. Some have done that very well and some have not. In some cases, it's their legacy issues. So it's that generations gone past perhaps haven't necessarily done the things that they should be doing.
He says the ministry is spending more than $1 billion a year on school property, and it's moving to take more responsibility for the upkeep of classrooms and other buildings.
One of the things that we've also been doing is putting in place a system whereby the schools that don't want to manage their own property can hand it over to the ministry, and the ministry will manage it for them. Because some schools do it really well and they don't have these issues. Others have, decades worth of legacy issues that they're working their way through.
Principals agree the government is spending more money than ever on school buildings, but there is a lot of work to be done. Deirdre Shea from the Secondary Principals Association says many schools have old buildings and it's hard to keep them up to scratch, especially if they weren't built well to start with.
It's a huge headache. There's no question about it. And we all know that if you're in a lovely environment, it really does make a difference. So it's an ongoing challenge. It's not going to go away tomorrow. There has been, as I say, more money put into the system in the last few years, which has been welcomed, but there needs to be more still.
She says schools are funded for maintenance and building work, but the money is insufficient if there are big problems like leaks and mould. The president of the Principals Federation, Perry Rush, says a lot of schools have problems with their buildings and they don't get enough money to deal with them all.
The scale of the challenge is so significant that it requires that schools prioritise, and very often there is only money to deal with the most serious challenges, and serious challenges are not being dealt with in a timely fashion.
Meanwhile, another Hutt Valley school, Hutt Intermediate, says it too had black mould, but the ministry moved fast to fix the problem. It says it's monitoring air quality and planning for significant building work in 5 or 6 years' time. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen TNA.
It's almost 21 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's a scene out of a Dickens novel, coal being shovelled straight into a coal boiler to heat up uninsulated and cold classrooms. But for many teachers and children across New Zealand, it's daily life. Around 200 schools still use a coal boiler, but the government is hoping to put an end to it. 10 more schools are being subsidised to get a replacement heating source, but National's questioning whether it will actually reduce any emissions. Harry Locke reports.
Coal would come in here, 8 tonnes of coal a year.
8 tonnes?
Yeah, I would get 2 lots of coal, so about 8 tonnes a year.
Yeah.
The small room where the coal boiler was stored inside Pukurua Bay School still has a stale smell, and its walls are blackened from decades of coal burning. The principal, Chris Ells, was showing Climate Change Minister James Shaw how the coal would come in from one end of the room and be shovelled straight into the boiler. It was in use for 50 to 60 years. It'd start at the beginning of term 2 and keep going for the rest of the school year.
That was the sad part, is once we started the fire, because you couldn't switch on and off, it just had to burn constantly, so we were just, even on weekends or the coal burner was going.
Els says as well as polluting the environment and being bad for the children's health, it just didn't work very well.
It was very ineffective. Basically, as it goes along the line, good heat at the start of where the coal room is, and then it peters out as it goes along. And as little people are, they will tend to go to the radiator and sit. And so it might have heated 10 kids, but the rest of the classes weren't probably getting the heat that they should have been getting.
Pukerua Bay School is one of 10 across the country, which are the latest to receive money from the government to replace their coal boiler. It's coming from the $200 million state sector decarbonisation fund, announced in 2019. With the 10 announced today, 36 schools will now have received money to replace their boiler. But that's still well short of the estimated 200 schools that use one. Shaw says replacing all of them is on the agenda.
If we're going to do all of the schools, we'll need to get some more money. But what we've done is we've said, look, we're going to start with the dirtiest, the oldest, the least efficient around the country. And so what we've said is that we'll do 90 of the schools with the pot of money that we've got.
That won't be completed by 2025, when the government has set the target of having a completely carbon-neutral public sector. The fund is designed to kickstart that movement. It will also pay for coal boiler replacements at the Southern Institute of Technology and a natural gas boiler at Taranaki DHB. Money is also being paid to improve energy efficiency of facilities at Auckland, Waikato and Hawke's Bay DHBs and Massey and Victoria universities. Shaw says in total it will save 26,000 tonnes of carbon emissions over the next 10 years. But National spokesperson on climate change Stuart Smith says that's not true.
I'm not against it. I'm just saying that packaging it as doing something for New Zealand's emissions is incorrect. It's laudable in some respects, but let's call it what it is. A policy that is helping schools out, which is great, but it's not. It's being packaged as a New Zealand emissions reduction plan. It's not.
But Smith accepts it will have merits for school communities. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
French lawmakers have voted to ban many short-haul flights to reduce carbon emissions. The law will end routes where the same journey could be made by train in less than 2.5 hours. The measures will face another vote in the Senate before becoming law. The BBC's Tim Allman reports.
Thanks to the pandemic, fewer people are taking to the skies. But the French government wants to see a reduction even when things get back to normal. It says it's committed to reducing carbon emissions, and the airline industry is a big producer of CO2. Hence the vote to ban a number of domestic flights, although connecting flights won't be directly affected. Either way, some lawmakers remain to be convinced.
I think this method is not the right one. The environmental choice must take precedence. But let's not abandon the social and economic choices around industry and around airports. The two are complementary.
The law still has to be approved by the Senate, but assuming it comes into effect, it'll prohibit all flights that could be made by train in less than 2.5 hours. That would bring to an end services between Paris and cities like Nantes, Lyon and Bordeaux. But after some objections from airlines and regional officials, longer flights from the capital to places like Toulouse, Marseille and Nice will still be allowed.
According to Greenpeace, this change would spare the most polluting air connections. With more than 3 million passengers in 2019, the flights between Paris and Nice generates the equivalent of 225,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide.
France, of course, has a renowned train network. Getting around here is usually pretty painless. It may not be the same for other countries who might be considering a similar scheme. But ministers insist big steps have to be taken if we're serious about climate change.
Tim Allman reporting. Australia's federal government wants to hold a workshop to end a long-running Trans-Tasman trademark battle over Manuka honey. The honey is claimed to have health and cosmetic benefits and is from the nectar of trees native to both Australia and New Zealand. Yet Kiwis want exclusive rights to the word Manuka. The ABC's James Glenday has the details.
Well, I've been using Manuka honey for years.
Kourtney Kardashian is just one of the many LA-based celebrities who believe in the benefits of Manuka honey.
I love as much natural stuff as I can get.
The product's been promoted by the likes of actress Gwyneth Paltrow and tennis star Novak Djokovic, and in recent years its price has soared. The honey is produced by bees from nectar from trees found in New Zealand and Australia. But here, local beekeepers say their Kiwi counterparts are threatening their livelihoods.
It'd be absolutely devastating. It would devastate a lot of people's businesses and the industry here.
Paul Callender from the Australian Manuka Honey Association says the problem is some New Zealand producers are determined to trademark the word Manuka. The Kiwis argue it has Maori origins and should be exclusively reserved for New Zealand honey in the same way the French use the term champagne, though the Australians disagree.
We have no problems with the New Zealanders using the word Manuka with a macron over the A or a double A, which is the correct spelling and has a meaning in New Zealand. That's absolutely understood. But the way we spell it as Manuka doesn't have any of those. And so we simply want to be able to use our own spelling of our own word to trade as we should be able to trade.
The debate has raged for years. A court decision is due within months, and now the Australian government is getting involved. The Trade Minister, Dan Tehan, raised the matter with his New Zealand counterpart yesterday, calling for a unified trans-Tasman push to market the product. In a statement to the ABC, he said,
I propose that the Australian and New Zealand governments jointly facilitate a workshop with our respective Manuka honey industries, including in areas such as industry development, research, joint marketing, technology sharing and addressing fraudulent honey products.
Australian beekeepers have welcomed his intervention, though they're not convinced the Kiwis will be interested. They'd like to see the federal government do something more drastic, like ban New Zealand honey imports to force them to negotiate.
The New Zealand's Manuka is from the same plant Australian Manuka is from and produced by the European honeybee, so honeybees can't tell a difference, nor can the consumer 9 times out of 10, except for the label on the jar.
Dr. Peter Brooks from the University of the Sunshine Coast has researched the chemical properties of Manuka honey for a decade. He's supporting the Australian Producers Campaign and would like to see more politicians advocate for a truce in the trademark battle.
If we lose that name Manuka honey, we'll lose about 500 beekeepers, I reckon, which are small to medium businesses, family-owned businesses, that could go broke.
Dr. Peter Brooks from the Sunshine Coast University ending that report from the ABC's James Glenday. On the subject of banks, we've had a lot of feedback about bank closures. This person says as a small retail business in Paeroa, the closure of the Westpac branch has caused significant detriment to the local community. Many are not computer competent and there is much in banking which requires actual face-to-face dealings. It now means I spend about an hour and a half round trip to Thames once a week for banking and till change versus 20 minutes max. The banks have deserted any real aspect of customer service. And someone else says many branches that are closing are very busy. The ASB in Manurewa had queues to the door pre-closure. Now it's the ASB Manukau that has the dozens long queues. Don't forget, if you know anything about the disappearance of Amber-Lee Cruickshank, call the police on 105 and the reference you need to say is Operation Oliver.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police will have their search and surveillance powers extended to enable them to take action if they suspect a terrorist act is being planned. A man has been charged with threatening to kill over comments at a Hastings mosque. The mother of missing toddler Amber-Lee Cruickshank says she just wants closure after police announced a reward. MIQ security guards are still almost entirely from private firms, even though the government decided 8 months ago to hire its own. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
It's surprising to see a quarter of New Zealanders still hesitant to get a COVID-19 vaccine.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
There's not been a discovery of a city like this for about 110 years. It's one of the greatest archaeological